When a movie about a teenager left home alone for the weekend created performances and scenes that became a permanent part of movie history. Well, released in 1983, Risky Business followed Joel Goodson, played by Tom Cruise, a careful suburban teenager with a college application, a perfect house, and absolutely no idea how bad the decisions he was about to make would become. Rebecca De Mornay played Lana, the cool and mysterious outsider. What appeared on screen already felt daring, but what happened behind the scenes was a completely different story. And today, we're counting down 15 strange facts about Risky Business that you probably never heard before. And stay until number 15, because before it became one of the most famous movie titles of the decade, this film had a name so forgettable that the studio removed it before it even made it onto a poster. And before we begin, do not forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell because it helps YouTube show this video to more retro movie fans just like you. Alright, grab those sunglasses and your dad's cleanest white button-down shirt. Let's get started with
Number 1. The relationship between Tom Cruise and Rebecca De Mornay was real. Now, the chemistry between Joel and Lana did not need much acting because Cruise and De Mornay had already started a real relationship off-screen by the time those scenes were filmed. And for the record, De Mornay's first impression of Cruise was that he was very annoying.
I could say a lot of things. I will say that I thought he was very annoying when we first started. He was extremely annoying.
But over time, he started to grow on her. Then the filming moved to Chicago, and the situation became much more complicated. De Mornay was still in a relationship with Harry Dean Stanton at the time. Armstrong wrote in his memoir that Stanton spent his days slowly swimming across the hotel pool for hours while De Mornay was on set, an image so full of dramatic irony that it felt like a deleted scene from a movie. According to Armstrong, Cruise had started to see Stanton as a guest who had stayed too long. The cast could clearly see what was happening, and they wisely chose to stay quiet about it. But eventually, the expected happened. Stanton went home, and the 2.5-year relationship that followed was mostly kept private. De Mornay did not openly talk about it until 2023.
Number 2. The director who made one huge hit and then stepped away from almost everything. Risky Business was Paul Brickman's first movie as a director. It became a major cultural moment that pushed Tom Cruise into a completely new level of fame. It created a very specific style of 1980s cool, and it made Hollywood ready to give Brickman almost anything he wanted for his next project. But apparently, what he wanted next was very little of it. The projects offered to him were not small either. Rain Man was offered to him. Forrest Gump was also offered to him, a script that he reportedly stopped reading after 12 pages because it made him fall asleep. Those two movies later won a total of 10 Academy Awards and became some of the most important films in American movie history.
And the Oscar goes to Forrest Gump.
But Paul Brickman turned down both movies, which in Hollywood was basically like refusing 2 winning lottery tickets while everyone around you stood there in complete silence. He moved out of Los Angeles almost right after Risky Business was released. He described himself as coming from the J.D. Salinger school of thinking when it came to public attention, and he mostly avoided the spotlight that most first-time directors with such a huge hit would have run toward. He did make one more movie, Men Don't Leave with Jessica Lange, before completely stepping away from directing. The movie did not perform well, and he never directed another film again. Years later, Brickman looked back on everything with surprising honesty. His opinion about his own career after Risky Business was, quote, "I squandered a really good career. What can I say?"
Number 3. How Joe Pantoliano entered the party that nobody invited him to. Before he became Ralph Cifaretto on The Sopranos, or the guy you definitely should not trust in The Matrix, Joe Pantoliano played Guido the killer pimp, and he almost did not get the role. David Geffen had concerns, specifically saying, quote, "He doesn't remind me of any pimp I know," which is the kind of sentence that raises more questions about Geffen than it does about Pantoliano. Producers John Avnet and Steve Tisch, along with Paul Brickman, strongly supported the casting choice. Pantoliano got the role even though Geffen objected, and then gave such a perfectly threatening performance that Guido became one of the most unforgettable supporting characters in the movie. Risky Business became his big breakthrough. After that came The Goonies, Midnight Run, The Matrix, Memento, and an Emmy Award for The Sopranos.
And the Emmy goes to my friend, Joe Pantoliano.
All of that success goes back to a role that one powerful executive believed he was not right for. Number 4. The famous dance scene was barely written in the script. The most famous 30 seconds in Risky Business came from just one line of direction: dance to rock music. That was it. That was the entire script for the scene. Tom Cruise and Paul Brickman discussed the shot beforehand, where to begin and where to move, but once the camera started rolling, everything else was completely up to Cruise. The candlestick used as a microphone, climbing on the furniture, and the total commitment of someone performing for an audience that was not even there, all of it was improvised during filming. Then the floor created a problem. The surface had too much grip, which made the planned slide look more like aggressive shuffling in socks. Cruise solved the problem by putting powder on one section of the floor for the smooth slide and sticky tape on another section so he could stop in the right place without crashing into the wall. It became a kind of two-zone floor setup, and it worked perfectly. Director Paul Brickman chose old-time rock and roll because he wanted the scene to feel timeless, something that would never make the movie feel old no matter when people watched it. Almost every kid in America tried to copy that scene as soon as their parents left the house, and they were all copying something that happened by complete accident. Number 5. Almost every major actor from the 1980s was considered for the same role. Before Tom Cruise slid across the floor in his socks, the role of Joel Goodson was being considered for a long list of actors that now looks like a Hollywood yearbook nobody expected to discover. We're talking about Tom Hanks, Nicolas Cage, John Cusack, Michael J. Fox, Sean Penn, Kevin Bacon, Gary Sinise, Matt Dillon, and Timothy Hutton. All of them were being considered for the same suburban teenager who accidentally turns his parents' house into a business operation. A different version of this movie where any one of those actors got the role would have been a completely different film. And depending on who was chosen, Joe Goodson could have been much funnier, a lot more nervous, or already shouting at someone before the opening credits even finished. Paul Brickman wanted something very specific, a mix of vulnerability and believability that could carry a character who is constantly in over his head. That is not an easy thing to find when your list of actors keeps including people who later became some of the biggest stars of the next 30 years. The role of Lana also had several possible versions. Michelle Pfeiffer was offered the role and turned it down, which is an amazing choice considering how successful her career was about to become. Next was Kim Basinger, who did not really like the script, so she politely passed on it. Sharon Stone also auditioned for the role. The casting process seemed to treat future stardom like it was a small detail that did not matter. Rebecca de Mornay got the role and brought a mix of control and unpredictability that made Lana feel genuinely unsettling in the best possible way. It was exactly what the character needed to balance against Cruise's wide-eyed chaos. Looking back now, the casting feels like the only choice that could have worked, but at the time, the movie was only one decision away from becoming something completely different. Number 6. Tom Cruise had to almost trick his way into getting cast. Now, Paul Brickman watched Cruise in Taps and left with one very clear impression. This guy is too intense to play a suburban teenager who is just figuring out economics. He was not wrong about the intensity. Cruise had a very strong, tightly controlled energy on screen, which is not really the usual feel for Joel Goodson. So Cruise's agent made some changes without telling him. She set up a meeting for Cruise to stop by Brickman's office during a break from filming The Outsiders, basically surprising the director with a casual visit that was anything but casual. Cruise arrived exactly as he had been on set. Greasy hair, a jean jacket, a chipped front tooth that had not been fixed yet for his Outsiders role, and still carrying an Oklahoma accent. He even had a tattoo he had not washed off yet. None of it was planned, he just did not have time to clean up. That accidental look worked like something carefully prepared on purpose. Brickman became interested, but Cruise still did not have the role, so he flew back to Tulsa and later returned for a proper screen test opposite Rebecca de Mornay, who was already cast. By his own admission, the screen test did not go especially well, but Brickman still cast him based on instinct, which was either a huge risk or the best casting decision of 1983, probably both. And the preparation did not stop there. To look younger on camera, Cruise lost 14 pounds in 5 weeks through jogging and strict dieting, then later stopped and adjusted his diet to bring a little softness back into his face so he would read more like a teenager. The awkward, confused kid performance that launched his career to the top was actually a carefully built illusion created long before filming even started. Number 7. The film rescued Ray-Ban from obscurity. Now, before Risky Business, Ray-Ban Wayfarers were quietly declining. Sales had dropped to around 18,000 pairs a year in 1981. The brand was doing so badly that Bosch & Lomb was seriously thinking about removing the Wayfarer line completely. But then Tom Cruise wore them, and suddenly the company's accountants had to open a much larger spreadsheet. Ray-Ban had already signed a $50,000 per year deal with a product placement company in 1982, leading to roughly 60 film and TV appearances each year, most of them small and barely noticed in the background. But sunglasses in a background scene is one thing, while sunglasses on the guy who just slid across the floor in his underwear is something completely different. Sales jumped by an estimated 2,000% from that 1981 low. Around 360,000 pairs were sold in 1983 alone, and by 1986, after appearing in shows like The Breakfast Club, Miami Vice, and Moonlighting, that number rose to 1.5 million per year. Joel Goodson had an attitude that came with sunglasses as part of it. That image was enough to bring an entire brand back from the edge and turn it into a defining visual shortcut for 1980s cool. Ray-Ban went from having only 2 styles in its lineup to around 40 models by 1989, rebuilding its entire business on the back of one character's wardrobe choice.
Number 8. The studio turned a dark movie into something that looked like a fun party film. Risky Business was made with a $6.2 million budget, and the producer was not very confident about how his next film would do. David Geffen's first worry was not marketing, but whether the film would even succeed at all. The movie did not have strong studio support like big releases usually get. What it did have was a story that did not fit into any clear category that audiences normally buy tickets for, so Geffen made changes before the film ever reached theaters. After casting was finished, he focused on how to present the film. With no huge marketing budget, the movie was positioned as something familiar, like a light teen sex comedy in the style of Porky's. The darker and sharper parts of the story were quietly hidden to make it feel more simple and fun. It was a low-budget strategy based on limited resources, and it worked much better than expected. The film ended up as the 10th highest-grossing movie of 1983, making over $63 million. Hey, quick pause. Press the like button. It shows YouTube that people still enjoy watching perfectly timed Porsche crashes in filmmaking. And subscribe if you haven't already. And while you're there, leave a comment about your own stories of trying that dance. Don't pretend you never tried it. All right, let's get back to the countdown with number 9. The Porsche got only one chance to go into the water correctly. Now, watching a Porsche 928 slowly roll off a dock and disappear into Lake Michigan is genuinely painful, not just for Joel. But what most people do not know is this: it was not just one car, it was not even 2 cars. The production used 6 different Porsches across filming and post-production, and none of them exactly matched the 928 you see on screen. They came from different model years, had different wheels, and different transmissions. They were edited together to look like a single car that did not technically exist. The one used for the water scene was completely stripped. There was no engine, no drivetrain, no V8. This was not only for budget reasons, but also because Illinois state pollution laws required it. A fully working car could not be sunk into Lake Michigan because of contamination risks. And there is something you can actually notice if you look closely. With the heavy engine removed, the car's front sits slightly higher than normal as it balances on the pier. It is right there in the final film. The crew even called it the dump car, which is a surprisingly casual name for something carrying the weight of such an important scene. A separate car was used for the rolling approach shot, so it was 2 cars making one sequence look smooth and natural on screen. Paul Brickman chose the 928 because it fit Joel's father perfectly, exotic but not flashy. Porsche, however, had nothing to do with the production and reportedly distanced itself at the time. They eventually changed their stance later, especially after the car became famous for its line, "Porsche, there is no substitute," delivered directly into the camera.
The hero car, the one used to teach crews how to drive a manual transmission before filming, survived the entire production untouched. It later went into private ownership and was sold at auction in 2021 for $1.98 million, setting a record for any Porsche 928 ever sold. Number 10. The ending that Paul Brickman originally built was not the one people eventually saw. His original cut of Risky Business ended on a much darker note. Joel and Lana sit in a restaurant at the top of the John Hancock Center, and the weight of everything Joel has done hangs over the scene. That was always intended as the ending. What Brickman did not want was what came after it, a lighter park scene added by the studio, where Joel and Lana share easy, casual dialogue and everything feels slightly more relaxed than it should. That one addition changed the tone of the entire film. Geffen Pictures decided that Brickman's version was too ambiguous and not something they could properly sell. What followed was not a single discussion over lunch, but a full process. Multiple versions were shown to test audiences to see how much discomfort people were willing to accept in a theater. The feedback made that discomfort measurable. At one point, Brickman even said he would not direct the new ending. The studio responded that they would find someone else who would. Each version tested gradually moved the film towards something more acceptable to audiences. The final ending that survived was the one that worked best in a room full of strangers, not necessarily the one that said the most.
Number 11. Tangerine Dream created the film's score using music they had already written. Now, Risky Business has a very specific mood that is hard to clearly describe, something that feels between a memory and a dream. It feels slightly unreal at the edges. That atmosphere did not happen by chance, and a lot of credit goes to Tangerine Dream's electronic soundtrack. But here is the part that is not often mentioned. 3 out of their 5 pieces were not originally composed for the film at all. They used tracks from their existing music library. They reworked older songs, gave them new titles, and placed them into the film as if they had been created specifically for the story. The track used for Lana came from a reworked part of their 1979 song, Force Majeure. The music associated with Guido the Killer Pimp came from Cloudburst Flight from the same album. Even composer Steve Reich noticed this. He later described the score as an out-and-out rip-off of his work, Music for 18 Musicians, and said he should have sued. So the soundtrack that shaped the entire feeling of the film was itself built from borrowed pieces, which means Tangerine Dream, in a way, did the same thing Joel Goodson does throughout the entire movie. Number 12. The train scene was built around a real city. The Chicago Transit Authority is thanked in the credits of Risky Business, which sounds normal until you understand what it actually took to get that credit. Paul Brickman knew exactly what the train represented in the story. The North Shore suburbs represent safety. The L train represents the connection between Joel and everything his world is not, a darker, more unpredictable city on the other side. The train itself becomes the entire journey made real. Filming it was much more difficult. The scene was shot on a real train, actually moving through Chicago at night, following real schedules and real stops, inside a transit system that had been running long before any film crew arrived and was not going to adjust for a shooting schedule. Then, during the Christmas production break, Brickman wrote additional action to connect the footage they already had. Editor Richard H. Chu built the sequence as a slow-motion progression, shot by shot, frame by frame, planned out on paper because there were no digital tools available to do it. Extras were placed throughout the train and exited at different stops, one by one, until the car becomes empty. Joel and Lana were left alone. That feeling of isolation is not created by camera tricks. It comes from logistics, built over months inside a moving train that had no awareness of any of it.
Number 13. The Goodson house became a tourist destination for the wrong scene. The Highland Park, Illinois home at 1258 Linden Avenue, used for the exterior shots of the Goodson house, is a real address on a real street in a real neighborhood that had no idea what was about to happen. After Risky Business came out, it stopped being just someone's house and started becoming a destination for fans. People would show up, drive slowly past, and stare at the front of a normal suburban home with a kind of respect usually saved for famous landmarks, half expecting Tom Cruise to walk out the front door at any moment. And then came the photos, because of course they did.
The strange detail that makes the whole thing even more ironic is that the famous dance scene was not filmed there at all. The interior shots, including the living room floor, were actually filmed inside the gymnasiums of Niles East High School, a closed school turned into a stand-in for the most famous living room in the film. The place that created one of the most iconic sock slide moments was not even a house. Fans were traveling specifically to photograph the outside of a building that had nothing to do with the most famous scene they were celebrating. But none of that slowed the attention down. The Highland Park house continued to attract drive-bys and visitors for years, with people standing outside trying to recreate a moment that was actually filmed somewhere else entirely. At some point, the difference between real location and film memory stopped mattering. The idea of the place replaced the actual place itself.
Number 14. Risky Business created a template that Hollywood kept reusing for years. Before this film, teenagers in movies were usually shown dealing with crushes, surviving high school, or learning simple life lessons that ended on a warm, comforting note. But Joel Goodson had a completely different goal. He was running a business, a full operation out of his parents' house, with planning, money management, and a criminal side that made everything more complicated. The movie placed a teenager inside an adult economic system and treated it seriously, and in 1983, that idea felt shocking. But it did not stay new for long. 3 years later, Ferris Bueller's Day Off by John Hughes used the same Chicago suburban setting and the same idea of a teenager taking full control the moment adults are gone. The influence went even further. When Cameron Crowe made Jerry Maguire, he told Tom Cruise directly that Joel Goodson was a major influence on the film. It became the idea of a sports agent running his own desperate operation based only on confidence and bad decisions. Number 15. The movie had a title that nobody would have remembered before it became a cultural landmark. Risky Business was originally called White Boys Off the Lake. Just think about that for a moment. White Boys Off the Lake. The title technically makes sense. You have suburban Chicago, wealthy teenagers, and Lake Michigan sitting in the background like a simple geographic detail in a school project. But Paul Brickman built the name around the location and the story's main group of characters, which is a logical way to name a film, but it also practically guaranteed that almost nobody outside a very small radius would feel excited to see it. The studio looked at it once and immediately moved on from it.
Hell no, to the no, 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 yeah, to the no.
They understood something very simple. Titles do a big part of the selling before a single frame of the movie even plays. White Boys Off the Lake sounds like a small local documentary that only shows once at a community center. It does not sound like a film that would define 1983. But Risky Business was sharper, more suggestive, and had the right mix of mystery and slight danger. It is the kind of title that gives you just enough information to make you want to see more. The original name did not disappear completely, though. It stayed in the final film as a line of dialogue, like a quiet inside joke for anyone paying close attention. And that is it. 15 strange and wild facts about Risky Business. What surprised you the most? Share this video with a friend who still thinks sliding on socks across a hardwood floor is a real-life skill. And subscribe so we can see you next time. Until then.